Hi, folks, and welcome to Empowering Democracy. I'm Joe Firestone, your host, and my topic for today, or for this stream anyway, is But He Can. And I will explain that title in just a moment. But for now, I wanted to suggest that maybe what we should be doing is changing the title of Election Day to Ejection Day, because there are so many people who need ejection from office because they've been bought by the donors. Bought by the donors. Hello, Dee. Dee is here from around the world with Brandy and Dee, the exciting new program on international relations that comes at the field of IR from a normative point of view. Shane says, "Hey, Joe." Hi, Shane. And Shane says, "Happy Election Day." Shane, I just said it should be called Happy Ejection Day. Okay, but anyway, thank you for the sentiment. I certainly understand it, and I certainly appreciate it. Anyway, today what I wanted to bring up was a conversation I had on Twitter this morning. Shane says LMAO. Of course, everybody knows what that means in Twitter speak, right? Okay, but for Bonnie's sake, I will explain that LMAO means laugh my ass off. Bonnie is sitting here watching. So here we go. I'm going to share the screen with my Twitter feed. Let me bring it closer here. Okay, so Lisa was tweeting to Nina Turner and someone else about maybe they should have abolished the filibuster. And so I replied, and I said, if the Democrats are to do anything worthwhile, their leadership in both houses will have to change. The opportunity to do that is here now. Well, actually, it's almost here. As soon as the election is over, I said, Pelosi, Schumer, and their leadership teams must go. And I got a reply from a gentleman named Ken, who says, unless the miraculously I think he meant to say, unless they miraculously hold the majority in both houses. Can you see that? Yeah, I guess you should be able to see that. Their ability to do anything at all will be will be nil. Well, I suppose in response to that, I should have said, do tell, and left everything right there. But instead, being the stubborn cuss I am, I said, the president can do a lot with executive orders. He should, for example, have a $100 trillion platinum coin minted and deposited at the Fed, and the possibility to end the possibility of debt ceiling crises. That would change the environment for attempts to cut Social Security, okay, and Medicare, and would end debt terrorism. So Ken replied, and he said, sure he could, but it will never happen. And even if he did, no even slightly progressive legislation will move forward in a Republican Congress. They will block everything, coin or no coin, EOs or no EOs, that is, executive orders or no executive orders. To which I replied, probably, but if he does the best he can with executive orders, Democrats will be able to run on that record, and the Republicans won't be able to defend austerity policy with myths about lack of money. Also, he can deny SCOTUS rulings and attack judicial supremacy. What I mean, I'm sorry, also he can defy SCOTUS rulings, sorry about that, and attack judicial supremacy. Okay, so what did I mean by that? Well, technically, the Congress and the executive branch have never accepted the claim of the Supreme Court to the power of judicial review. Yes, there's plenty of practice to show that the executive branch has acceded to what the Supreme Court has said, but there's been no formal accession to the Supreme Court of their right to be the sole interpreter of the Constitution and to be able, therefore, to say what the Constitution means and to use that power to invalidate laws passed by Congress and various rulings of the executive branch concerning what the laws mean. That right to judicial review is not explicitly in the Constitution of the United States. It was an inferred power that was first asserted and then applied by the third Chief Justice of the United States, John Marshall, in the Marbury versus Madison case, and McCulloch versus Maryland case. One of those cases was in 1803, and the other was in 1827. Sometime during the 1830s, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court. I forget what the issue was. It might have been the second bank in the United States, okay, or whatever. But the Supreme Court put forward a ruling about that. And Andrew Jackson, who was president at the time, famously said, well, the Supreme Court has ruled, okay, the Supreme Court has handed down their ruling. Now let them enforce it. Of course, the Supreme Court has no means of enforcing any rulings because it doesn't have the executive power. It doesn't have any soldiers at its command. It doesn't have the FBI at its command. It needs the executive branch of government to accept its rulings and to enforce them. If the Supreme Court declares a law of Congress or a ruling of the executive branch is unconstitutional, which it frequently does, by the way, it is possible for the executive branch to say, well, folks, we don't see it that way. We respect your ruling and your right to interpret the Constitution, but now we want to tell you that we have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution as well, and therefore we have the right to interpret the Constitution as we see fit, and nowhere in the Constitution is there an explicit grant to the Supreme Court as the only power that can interpret the meaning of the Constitution and therefore fulfill its oath to protect and defend the Constitution. We've all taken that same oath, and we have a different interpretation of what the law is than you have. And furthermore, we have the means, we, the executive branch, have the means to enforce it, and the legislative branch has the means to insist on that particular law. And if the Congress insists on the law that it has passed, and they collaborate with us in terms of enforcing a particular meaning of that law, then while we will listen to your advice on whether that interpretation is constitutional or not, you have no means to enforce that advice. We will enforce our own interpretation of the Constitution. And in this case, we disagree with your interpretation of the Constitution, and we're going to go along with ours. We suggest that you adjust yourself to that particular reality so that this nation can go forward with some consensus about what its laws are and what the meaning of its laws are. Well, that's what I mean by also he can defy SCOTUS rulings and attack judicial supremacy. And then I said to Ken, because I knew Ken was going to come back, oh, but he'll never do that. I said, yes, I know he won't, but he can. Now, why is he can important? He can is important because what he can do but chooses not to do is his responsibility. He has the decision-making power to do the things I just outlined and more. There are hundreds of executive orders he can hand down to make our situation better. Many of these executive orders were reviewed in I believe, in the beginning of 2021, indeed, in the fall of 2020, when the American Prospect actually did a series on the executive orders the president could do to make things better. Of course, the president has only implemented a handful of those executive orders. I forget the number of executive orders that they talked about in their series, but it was something like 85 or 87, a huge number of executive orders. The powers of the president are huge. The powers of the presidency to change things are huge, even in the face of a hostile Congress. Of course, the Congress could choose to impeach the president, but let's face it, folks, if Joe Biden were impeached, if the Republicans impeached him every single week, they're not going to have enough votes in the Senate to convict him. They may win the Senate this time or may not win the Senate. The issue is still not resolved today. It may not be resolved for weeks. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they do take over the Senate. They might have a 3 or 4 vote advantage. Having 54 votes is not enough to impeach a president. Last time I checked, you had to have at least 67 votes, I believe. And so, they can't get Joe Biden out of office until the beginning of 2025. That's the earliest it could possibly be done. So Joe Biden can sit there and draft his executive orders and keep on doing it. And the Supreme Court can consider whether those executive orders are constitutional to its heart's content. But until they get to ruling about those executive orders and declaring them unconstitutional, those executive orders would be enforced. And even after that, if the president wanted to say, you've handed down your decision, now let's see you enforce it, those executive orders would stay in place until January of 2025. Those executive orders can have very difficult consequences for people. For example, they can be arrested because of them. They can be bankrupted because of them. What I'm saying here is the powers of the presidency are immense. Whatever happens in this election today, Joe Biden could and should use those powers to create more equity and more justice here in the United States. And I certainly hope that he gathers a sufficient amount of courage and will to do things like that. So thank you all for coming. Hope you liked this stream. I have to leave now. I will be back at 5 o'clock with my second update of the day. That will be on early indications concerning what's happening with the elections. I will be also on, at 9 p.m. to discuss more of the elections picture with you. And before I go, I do want to remind you about my Patreon account, patreon.com/Joe_Firestone, and my Buy Me a Coffee account, which is buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. And I'd appreciate an occasional contribution to those two sources. So meanwhile, thank you all for coming, and I will see you later at 5 p.m. Thanks.